Okay. Good morning and Boker Tov, Shavua Tov, and Chag Sameach.
Chag
As it is
Sameach.
a holiday today, we are during the seventh day of Sukkot, of Sukkot. I'm sorry about the choppy start, but hopefully it's smooth sailing from here onward. Okay, so good to see you all this morning, and we are ready to begin our weekly Parsha class. So today is a unique time. It's a unique Parsha. This week we will study two Parshas, two different Parshas. The first half we will conclude the entire Chumash, the entire Torah, all the 5 books of Moses. We will read the Parsha of Vizos Habracha. This is the Parsha, the concluding Parsha where Moshe blesses the Jewish people and Moshe passes away. This will be read not on Shabbos. This will be read on Wednesday morning during holiday services, because this week, just to give you some background, the Sukkot holiday is a 7-day holiday. It began Monday night last week, and it concludes Monday evening this week. Right? It's 7 complete days. Tuesday to Monday night. Then this holiday is followed by another holiday called Shmini Atzeres / Simchat Torah. It's a 2-day holiday in the Diaspora. It's a holiday of rejoicing, a holiday of celebrating, a holiday of being, even though Sukkot in general is a time to celebrate, there's an additional dose of joyous energy that is dropped on us on the second days of the holiday, as it's called, the Shmini Atzeres 2-day holiday, which is Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday. Wednesday is the climax. Wednesday is Simchat Torah. It's a day we celebrate the giving of the Torah. We dance with the Torah. For those of you who have been to shul on these days, we take the Torah out. We circle the bima 7 times. We sing and we dance and we celebrate the young and the old, everyone together as a community. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful time. Here at Chabad, obviously, everyone's welcome. We have Tuesday night, a large celebration of the giving of the Torah and dancing with the Torah. Now, we conclude the Torah, we read the Vizos Habracha Parsha on Wednesday morning. Already on Thursday, we begin the new Parsha, the Parsha of Bereshit, the first Parsha of Genesis, right at the beginning, God created the heaven and earth. And we read that Parsha on Shabbos. So we have a very short window of time to study Bereshit. It's only about 3 days, because on next week, Sunday, we are already on to Noach. We're already on to the second Parsha. So even though it's a long Parsha and there's a lot to discuss, it's going to be all condensed into 3 days of study. So today what we're going to do is, even though this week is, it kind of has the last and the first in one week, we're going to focus on Vizos Habracha, on the last Parsha. And we're going to see perhaps a very strong connection between this Parsha and the upcoming holiday of Simchat Torah, when we rejoice with the Torah. So if you have a Chumash with you, we are on page 1357. That's where we begin. Otherwise, it's Deuteronomy, Devarim, chapter 33. It's the last Parsha, Parsha Vizos Habracha. The entire Parsha, it's a somewhat of a shorter Parsha. The entire Parsha is 2 chapters, talking about 41 verses, and the Parsha opens up with Moshe's blessings to the Jewish people right before he passes away. Again, just try to imagine that. If you have a loved one who passed away, a parent, a grandparents, and the family is all gathered around the bed, and this is the last will and testament. This is the last few words that this person, our loved one, is telling us. The Jewish people know that Moshe will not go into the land of Israel with them. Moshe is passing away on the eastern side of the Jordan River, and he's passing away any moment. Moshe gathers the Jewish people for one last time, and he blesses each of the tribes with a beautiful, beautiful blessing. So the Torah opens up, Vizos Habracha, and this is the blessing that Moshe blessed. And we refer to Moshe, a man of God, Ish Elokim. We say he was half man, half God. He was so close to God. He was obviously a godly person, like no other. And this is what he blesses the Jewish people. And it goes on to with this beautiful blessings. You can read it inside, and he goes to each tribe specifically, talking about a blessing that is something specific for their personality, for their character traits, for their mission in life, something to do with their tribe specifically. And after you finish speaking to all the tribes, he speaks to all the Jewish people, and he gives blessing to all the Jewish people. And after that, the Torah in chapter 34 talks about how Moshe went up to the mountain of Nevo, Mount Nevo, a mountain where the Talmud tells us that we don't know where it is. No matter how much the historians and the scientists, they try to find where is this mountain. We know the general location. Obviously, it's somewhere in the Sinai Desert, but we don't know where it is. We have never found it, and the Torah says we will never find it. And Moshe goes onto the mountain, and God says, "Look at Israel, the land that you so much wanted to enter, and for whatever reason it was decreed that you would not enter. Look at the mountain. Look at the land." And the way Rashi explains, he also saw the future. He saw all that will happen to the Jewish people in the land of Israel, the history, the good and the bad, and the hard times and the good times. King Solomon building the temple, etc., the prophets, the judges. He saw it all. He saw the future. He saw the land, the physical land, but he also saw everything that will occur in this land. And the conclusion of the Torah is that Moshe passes away, and Joshua basically takes the reins. And the Jewish people cried after Moshe passes away for 30 days. I'm sure you're familiar with the idea of Shloshim, the 30-day period after someone passes away. We find this clearly here in the Torah. Passes away 30 days, they cry. The Torah gives us a little eulogy, who Moshe was, a beautiful eulogy. How there was no other prophet as Moshe. He was able to speak to God face to face. And all that he has done throughout the years for the Jewish people, the miracles he performed in Egypt, the miracle he performed throughout the 40 years in the desert, and all that he has done for the Jewish people, a true faithful shepherd, willing to give up any honor, any prestige, any reward for his own personal benefit, only for the Jewish people. Someone who cared for the very last Jew, no matter if they were for them or against them. Times where people were rebelling against them, he was still praying on their behalf. He was a true prophet and a true faithful shepherd. This is the short eulogy in about 3 verses that the Torah concludes the entire Torah with. So that is, like we say, the recap, the synopsis, the summary of the Parsha of Vizos Habracha. Well, what we like to do, we like to zero in and focus on one Parsha, one verse specifically. So I want to go back to the beginning. Verse 4. Verse 4 of chapter 33. Moshe says one of the most famous verses in the Torah. This is a verse that young children are taught this, the very beginning of the Jewish education. Verse 4 reads as follows. We're on page 1357. Torah tziva lanu Moshe morasha kihilas Yaakov. Does that sound familiar? Torah, there's even the song, Torah, 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 tziva, right? There's a song that we sing, young children know this. You go to Hebrew school, you go to a day school, you go to a Shabbat party. This is one of the songs that they're singing. Torah tziva lanu. What does it mean in English? The Torah is what Moshe commanded us. This Torah is an inheritance. It's a Yerusha, an inheritance to the Jewish people, to the congregation of Jacob. We refer to the Torah, it's the Torah that Moshe gave us, and secondly, Morasha is an inheritance. So let's just kind of discuss this for a few moments. If we want to discuss the Torah, what is the Torah, right? If someone asks you on the street, you always need an elevator pitch, right? Elevator pitch, a quick 30-second, 1 minute explanation. What is the Torah? Tell me what the Torah is. I never heard of I read something, someone told me about the Torah. What is it? What is our answer? What is the Torah? So here we have one verse. Lynn, you want to say something? You're mute. You're muted. We can't hear you. We can't hear you. Okay. I'd love to hear your comments. Okay. So you have an elevator pitch. What is the Torah? So here we have a verse. Verse 4. The Torah is what God gave us through Moses, and it is our inheritance. That's it. The elevator door opened. It's a quick elevator pitch. What is so significant about these 2 points? The Torah that came through Moses, and it's an inheritance. So obviously we know that the Torah has quote unquote developed over the years. What do I mean by developed? I mean, obviously we have the Chumash, right? We have the Torah, the scripture that we're studying. Was that given through Moses? Of course, right? By the way, parenthetically, the end of the Parsha deals with Moses' passing. If every verse in the Torah was written by Moses, who wrote those verses? Who wrote the last few verses of the Torah that talks about Moshe's death and the short eulogy after he passed away? Who wrote it? These are the 5 books of Moses. These are the books that Moshe himself wrote. Who wrote those verses? So there's a dispute. One opinion is that yes, it's the 5 books of Moses, except the last few verses. The last few verses, obviously Moshe did not write them, he passed away. This was the few verses that Joshua, his successor, he wrote those verses. That's one opinion. But there's another opinion. The other opinion is it says no. Every single verse of the Torah was written by Moshe. In these few verses, God dictated to Moshe to write them before he passed away. And he was crying, and while he was crying with his tears, he wrote these few verses, and Moshe passed away, and the short eulogy on himself. That's a side point. But this is the books of Moses, right? Moshe obviously gave us the Torah. But what about other ideas in the Torah? What about the Mishnah? What about the Talmud, which are basically the rabbis who are discussing and teaching us the Torah, their explanation to the Torah? Who wrote that? Is that part of the Torah? Is that the Torah that Moshe gave us? Or is it Rabbi Hillel and Rabbi Shammai and Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir? They gave us the Torah. Who gave us the Torah? And this is a verse that we teach the young children. And we're teaching the young children that you should know the Torah that we have. Who gave it to us? God gave it to us through Moshe. And the child may scratch their head and say, Moshe? I know Moshe in the actual scripture. I don't know Moshe in the Talmud. My teacher's name is not Moshe. He's teaching me a lot. She's teaching me a lot. Why Moshe? How does it come through Moshe? So the message of education that we're teaching a young Jewish child is that no, although many, many rabbis throughout the generations have developed the Torah, has explained the Torah, and have taught us the Torah, but ultimately everything comes through Moshe. All of the Torah, with all its further explanations throughout the generations, were given to Moshe at Sinai. And later they were developed. They were developed, but they were given, they're not new. It's not a new Torah. This is all included in the Torah that Moshe received at Sinai. A very interesting piece of Talmud. almost hard to kind of understand what this means. But there's this idea where Moshe is once comes into a classroom. God shows him a vision of the classroom in the yeshiva study hall, thousands of years later. And Rabbi Akiva, the great sage Rabbi Akiva, is teaching students. And Moshe is watching, taking a back seat, and seeing how Rabbi Akiva is teaching his students the Torah. And he's teaching and giving, kind of deriving many new ideas from different verses and letters, etc., etc. And Moshe is kind of having a hard time understanding what's going on over here. I don't remember this Torah. And Moshe watches how one of the students asks Moshe, asks Akiva, Rabbi Akiva, tell me, where do you get this from? This is a beautiful idea that you just taught. What's the source? And Rabbi Akiva answers, this was given to Moshe at Mount Sinai. And Moshe hears that and says, oh, I feel better now. The idea is that everything was given to Moshe. The Torah is not a new Torah. When I come up with an idea in the Torah, it's not my idea. I developed an idea that was given to Moshe. It's all part of the Torah. I have to follow the principles, the guidelines of how to study Torah, which was given to Moshe. Teaches us how to derive things. We can't just say, hey, I don't think this is the right explanation, and kind of make up my own explanation that's not based on the principles of how to study Torah. But the ideas that we develop is all part of the Torah that was given to Moshe. It's not a new Torah. And that's important information, idea that we were trying to instill in our children. That the Torah, although it was developed by many rabbis throughout the generation, these are not new ideas. These were all ideas that were given to Moshe. That's point number one. But then there's point number two, perhaps even more important. Point number two is the second half of the verse. Morasha kihilas Yaakov. The Torah is an inheritance. What's an inheritance? Someone passes away. What do I have to do to receive the inheritance? You know what I have to do? Nothing. By my mere existence, I am a child, I'm a grandchild of this person who passed away. I am the next of kin. I receive. That's what happens. Especially in Torah law. You don't need any documents, you don't need any wills, you don't need anything. According to Torah law, children inherit their parents just by the mere fact that I'm a child. I don't have to love my parents. I don't have to be in a good relationship with my parents. I don't have to do anything. I'm a child. I receive it. It's an inheritance. It belongs to me. And this is the Torah. We're telling a child right away, the Torah is your inheritance, which means when we study Torah, this is an important idea. I think it's important to develop this idea. When we study Torah, there can be two different approaches that we may take to the study of Torah. One approach is the approach of academia. The approach of academia is the Torah is a very deep book of wisdom. There's a lot of wisdom in the Torah. Right? Do we all agree with that? Yeah. It's the profound ideas. And that is why you don't have to be Jewish to study the Torah, because the Torah is wisdom for all nations. It's God's wisdom. You don't have to go to a yeshiva per se. You can go to a university or a college, go online, and you could study courses on the Torah. You don't have to be a rabbi to teach Torah, right? There's a lot of deep philosophical, intellectual ideas in the Torah. And this approach to the Torah is approach of intellect. I like something which is stimulating to my mind. The Torah is definitely a deep idea of wisdom. Let me study the Torah. Now, this approach is an approach of intellect. It's not necessarily a godly, a divine approach. There's no holiness to the Torah per se. It's a book of deep intellect. And therefore, you could go to university the same way you study Shakespeare and you study math and science, you study Torah, you study Talmud. Why not? Right? I have a very, very good friend who went through the yeshiva system, and then he says, you know what? He wants to take a year off and go to a university and see how they study the same Talmud in university. And he came back and he said, it's very pragmatic. It's very deep. They analyze it. They study it very, very well. But there's no holiness to the study. There's no feeling of wow, this is God's wisdom. Let me study it with respect. Let me study it with some reverence and some awe. We don't have that. It's just a book of study. It's a book of intellect. This is one approach. And this approach, who has the Torah? Those who have intellect, those who have deep minds. They grasp the Torah. They grasp the Torah to its depth. You're a simple-minded person. You don't really understand the depth. You don't have the Torah as much as I have the Torah. There's a very interesting passage in the Talmud. The Talmud tells us one of the reasons why the temple was destroyed. Hear this. The temple was destroyed. It's a terrible thing, obviously. Millions of people were killed. The temple was destroyed. The Jewish people were sent into exile. The temple was destroyed. For what reason? Because the Jewish people did not bless God before they studied Torah. Now, for those of you who do some prayers in the morning, in the prayer book, there's a short verse that we say every morning. It's a blessing on the Torah. I'm not sure if you see this, if it's backwards or not. Right over here, page 8, towards the bottom of the page. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. God, who has chosen us from among the nations, and blessed are you who gives us the Torah. Right? The blessing to God, for God who gives us the Torah. Right? Very simple blessing. You know how long it takes me to say it every morning? Maybe 2 seconds, 5 seconds. I'm having a slow day, 10 seconds. It doesn't take much effort to say that blessing. The Jewish people didn't say the blessing, so the Torah, so the temple was destroyed. First of all, why did they say the blessing? So simple. Takes a second. And okay, so I didn't say the blessing. I'm saying, why is the blessing so important? Thanking God for giving us the Torah. Saying the blessing is not about saying the words. It's about thinking about the message of the blessing. What's the blessing? The blessing is, I recognize that now I'm coming to study the Parsha. I'm coming to study the Torah. I'm coming to study the Talmud, which is deep messages in life lessons, deep philosophical debates in the Talmud, which is beautiful. I love it. But remember, it's God's Torah. And when we're coming to study, yes, I enjoy the intellect, I enjoy the depth of the Torah, but ultimately, I also recognize that through the study of the Torah, I connect with God. It's a holy endeavor. And this is the message of the second half of the verse. Moirasha kihilas Yaakov. That the Torah is an inheritance. Meaning, even if I don't have intellect, or even if I do, but this is not my connection, it's an inheritance. It belongs to me. It's mine. Because I'm a Jew and every Jewish person received the Torah at Mount Sinai. So yes, we have to study. And the more we study, the more connected we are with God. But my approach to the Torah is because it's mine, and therefore it's godly, and therefore it's a godly gift of mine. So even if I study more Torah and you study less Torah, one does not have more of a connection to the Torah than the other. Because it's an equal inheritance. There are 5 children in the family. We all receive a fifth, 20% of the inheritance. One's very successful, very a business mind like type of person. One person is a good for nothing type of guy, but they're equally children, and each person receives an equal share in the inheritance. Yes, one person may take that 20% and let it grow and be smart with the investments and how to use it. They'll use it wisely and they'll maybe gain a lot more from it. Correct. But that 20% goes equally to all 5 children. All Jewish people receive an equal portion in the Torah. Yes, the more we study, the more we have. But the approach to the study is, I'm an equal partner. I'm an equal partner. This is the idea of the Torah. This is why we teach this verse right at the beginning of our Jewish education. Tell this child, you're going to go through life now, and you're going to study Torah, hopefully many, many times. But remember, the Torah is an inheritance. The Torah is yours because this is what God gave us as a gift. And when we study Torah, remember, it's a godly wisdom, it's a godly endeavor, it's a godly pursuit, it's a godly study. Don't forget the giver of the Torah. Don't forget that blessing. God gave us the Torah, and therefore we are studying the Torah. And when we and there's practical ramifications in this as well, because what happens when we question the Torah? What happens when we come to a certain passage or a verse or a Talmudic story or something where we don't understand it? We say, wow, this is ridiculous. I can't wrap my head around it. So if our approach is approach of intellect, my intellect doesn't understand this, I say, you know what? I question it. I'm skeptical. I'm cynical. It doesn't really make sense. But if my approach is that this is a godly pursuit, this is a godly wisdom, yes, I try to understand, but I also recognize that ultimately I'm a mortal human being, finite human being, and God's wisdom is infinite, so I could understand whatever I could understand, but ultimately it's God's wisdom. I'm not going to question his wisdom. It's a different approach to the Torah. And this is why, coming to the conclusion of the Torah, on Simchat Torah, right? This Tuesday night and Wednesday, we will celebrate with the Torah. We're going to dance with the Torah. The community will dance with the Torah. It's a joyous time. I'm not sure which other religions we study a book and we're so excited that we concluded it, and we can't wait to begin the new cycle again. We're dancing the whole night, dancing the whole day. It's a very joyous occasion. How do we dance with the Torah? Who dances with the Torah? So we don't. So the way we rejoice in the Torah is not necessarily by opening the Torah and studying Torah. That's what we do before Simchat Torah and after Simchat Torah. On Simchat Torah, you know what we do? We keep the Torah closed. We keep it tied up with its cover, and we dance with the closed Sefer Torah. The idea is, when the Torah is open and we're studying Torah, so perhaps you study Torah more than I do, you have a better Hebrew than I do, you understand it more than I do, so we're all very different. Lynn is not like Lance, and Lance is not like Brian, and Brian's not like Sandy, and Mrs. Goldschmidt, and Mrs. Goldschmidt is not like Karen. We're all different. We have different levels of understanding. We have different backgrounds in our Jewish education. We're not all equal. When it comes to the study of Torah, we're all different. So therefore, when we rejoice, when we celebrate the giving of the Torah or the conclusion of the Torah, how do we celebrate? We celebrate by keeping the Torah closed, and we all celebrate with the Torah equally, because the Torah is our inheritance, and that is equal to all of us. Which, by the way, also is the idea of unity, which we spoke last week, and we're all very much the same. I want to conclude with the story, and I'm choppy with the details of the story, so please bear with me. But I think the story is a beautiful story. There was a child who once joined Hakafot, or the Simchat Torah celebration, in the Chabad headquarters in Brooklyn, in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, in 770 Eastern Parkway, which is the central synagogue where the Rebbe was. This is going back maybe 30, 40 years. And packed from wall to wall, thousands of Hasidim are there. They're dancing, they're singing. It's very lively. You feel it in the air. Whoever was there, Emes was there many years. I was there as a child. It's hard to describe the energy in that room during Simchat Torah. But either way, he notices that there's one man holding a child who's really, really involved, singing and dancing with all his might. Something unique, something special. So this child says, "Who is this man? Wow, this man must be such a happy person. Look at this person, how happy he is, dancing with the Torah." And the response that he got was, let me tell you, this man, his name was Rabbi Gansberg, Rabbi Hishka Gansberg, and he actually lost his wife. His wife, a young mother, passed away just a few days before, maybe a week before, maybe just finished Shiva. And obviously, a very, very sad and difficult time for his life, for him in his life. He had young children at home. And what could you say? What could you say? And comes Simchas Torah, the fact that he's standing and dancing this way, it's not to take for granted. Not to take for granted. Most people probably wouldn't be able to have that mind space at that moment to rejoice. And that made such a strong impact on this child. Hearing that, wow, a person going through this is able to rejoice on Simchas Torah. I mean, it made a very, very deep and long impact on this person. Fast forward a number of years. Rabbi Gansberg, his husband, is working for an organization in New York called Tzach, which basically, one of the things that they do is they help send yeshiva boys to other neighboring synagogues to help with Simchas Torah, with the celebration, with the rejoicing, with the dancing, with making a minyan sometimes, a program that they do till today. He gets a call in the office. Someone from Queens says, "You know what? I'm making a minyan for Simchas Torah. I would like Chabad to send some boys to help out." This is wonderful. That's very nice. It seems like you're a new synagogue on our list. Tell me about it. Why is this something new? Have you done this for many years? Is this the first time that you're requesting that we send boys? He says, "Yeah, this is actually the first time. I moved to Queens and I'm starting my own little minyan. And I remember when I was a child, I was at Chabad at in Eastern Parkway, and I saw this man who was dancing with all his might, and I heard his story that he just lost his wife. That made such a strong impact that I made this resolution that when I have my own little synagogue, I am always going to make sure that Simchas Torah is done right, with the right energy and the right celebration. So I'm calling Chabad to please send me some of the boys." Rabbi Gansberg says, "I want to tell you, you're probably talking about me. I think I was the man who you're referring to." So that was like a nice full circle. But the point is that yes, we have a lot going on in our lives today. I mean, I feel like this whole holiday season to me is like I'm working one day at a time. Don't ask me what's happening tomorrow. I'm trying to deal with today, with our evacuation and dealing with insurances and adjusters and the lack of many people are still evacuated. People are still displaced. People are not, a lot of people are not back at the normal, routine. And with the holidays coming one after another during the weekdays, it's very difficult. And Yom Kippur came. It's like, hey, today's Yom Kippur. Almost no celebrate. Sukkot, Simchas Torah. And sometimes it's hard to kind of get into the mood. It's kind of hard to get into it. And I think the importance of Simchas Torah, this celebrating our inheritance, our unique inheritance, celebrating our Torah. It's important to take the time, give some space, the mind space to this idea, and to truly, truly celebrate this holiday, celebrate who we are, our connection with God, celebrate our Torah. So next week we'll continue with our Parsha class. We'll already be after Simchas Torah. And we'll already be on the second portion, the portion of Noah. I think we'll do a short recap next week on the Parsha of Vizos as well. But this week we're focusing on the conclusion of the Torah. And if you're able to join us Tuesday nights, we're having our celebration here at Chabad. Wednesday morning as well. And if you're at home, celebrate at home. Dance, celebrate, rejoice, say L'chaim for who we are. And hope to see you next week.
Continue.
All the best.
Yasher Kalach.
My pleasure, Mrs. Goldschmidt.
Wish I could be there.
Yeah.